Welcome to the Christian Ministries Church podcast. We're praying that this message equips and empowers you to live in the kingdom of God. Now for today's sermon by Pastor Tim Brooks.
Real quickly, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. For those that are married in this church, and for those of you who are married watching us online right now, don't miss this spring marriage conference. It's only 8 weeks from now, and if you're married, you don't want to miss this. It'll be one of the best weekends of your year. Make a decision and be there. We need you to register. We need you to register for the conference. You can go to Christian Ministries Church website and register. You can get with Sean. She can help that with you in the foyer. You need to register. You need to register for the conference. Then the next thing you need to do is call Thousand Hills Hotel and Resort in Branson, Missouri, and book your room. Now, if you don't call them, and when you call them, if you don't say, I'm with the Christian Ministries Church Marriage Conference, then you won't get the room discount that our conference gets. So you need to call them and make your reservations. Marriage is something that constantly takes work. You're never arrived because it's always changing. You don't even have marriage off the ground and you have kids. And then you got to be married with kids. And boy, you don't get that figured out until those things become teenagers. And you know, the only good thing about dealing with a teenager is that in your heart you can know one day you will have an incorrigible teenager. And that way I'll be paid back as I watch you deal with their bad attitude and their refusal to do what I'll watch you deal with. That's the only way you get paid back as a parent. But you got teenagers, and you're trying to deal with a teenager and keep your marriage on the track. Before you get that figured out, then you got an empty nest syndrome, and now it's just you and her and the dog bumping around in there in the house, and you're trying to figure that out. And then you start getting older, and you lay in bed together and try to figure out, is there anything on me that doesn't hurt right now? And so you're trying to have this happy marriage, laying there deciding who's going to get up and get the Tylenol so you can both get out of bed. I mean, marriage takes work. And so I encourage you, whether you're a newlywed or you've been married 50 years, don't miss this marriage seminar in Branson, Missouri. Y'all make that happen. Get online and sign up. Well, let's get into the Word. Are you ready to receive what God has for you today? John chapter 10, verse 10. Make sure our church has this verse memorized. This is a vital verse, and it's vital for you every single day of your life because it is the dividing line in life. John 10:10 says, the thief comes, help me out, to kill, steal, and destroy. But I have come that you might have life and life more abundant. Here's the line in the sand. If it kills, steals, or destroys, we know where that came from. If it's bringing life and life more abundant, then you can know where that comes. If it destroys your vision, if it kills your drive, you can know that's not God. Now, it aggravates me to see during the course of the day God getting blamed for stuff He didn't do. I don't like the insurance company's material that says we're insuring you against the acts of God. Do y'all ever read Genesis? That wasn't God's plan. God didn't plan for earthquakes and tornadoes. As a matter of fact, He never wanted your golf game rained out. Water just came up from the ground to water the earth. See, God's plan. Here's God's plan. Here's what the devil does. God, why did you do this? God, why did you let this happen? Hey, God didn't want that to happen either. God didn't intend on us living in sin. My purpose, I came to bring life. And this is the new covenant life that we're talking about. And we got to live aware of the enemy's trap, of the enemy's MO, of the thief's tools that he uses. What happens during your day that the thief uses to steal life from you? We live in a fallen, imperfect world. and we live with fallen, imperfect people. God did not intend on us living with imperfect people. God intended on your husband being perfect. God intended on your wife being perfect. And Adam and Eve were perfect until they corrected all of that for us. And with sin, then comes a fallen world with imperfect people, and that was not God's plan. God's plan, you can go back and read Genesis, God's plan was for us to live in perfection. Now, we got a world full of sinners. We got a world full of imperfect people. And it'll change life for you. Teenagers, it changes your life when you realize your parents are not perfect and you quit expecting them to be. See, it changes life for you when you realize that your teacher is not perfect and is doing the very best she can to give herself to the education process, and she's not perfect, nor does she deal with every student perfect at every turn. See, it changes your life when you realize that your employees, your coworkers are not perfect. It's changing for you to realize your boss is not perfect. The only people that are blessed for that is Josh and Paul. They live in a unique situation, but for the rest of you, your boss isn't perfect. It's just, this is where we live. Husbands and wives, your mate is not perfect. Quit looking for life to be fair, for life to be perfect. Quit looking for life to make you happy. What we're learning and understanding this year is life in the new covenant. That is, we have such a covenant relationship with the Lord. In the midst of imperfect, we can find life and life more abundant. Tim, how's your day going? It's going great. Thanks for asking. That doesn't mean that I hadn't been lied about, that I hadn't been cheated, that somebody didn't make me mad enough that I could see red. All of that has happened for me, but thank you for asking. I'm having a great day because the thief is not going to kill, steal, or destroy the day that the Lord has made. I'm not going to allow that to happen for me. Here's what you got to understand. My wife didn't bring me life and life more abundant. If a husband could bring you life and life more abundant, then God would have just sent husbands and not Jesus. Think that through. Your husband can't bring you life and life more abundant. Your boss can't bring that to you. Your co-workers can't deliver that to you. Your school teacher can't deliver an abundant, joy-filled life to you. Jesus is the only one. Jesus is the only one that can bring you life, and everything else, all of life, you work through the wrongs and the imperfections and the injustices through what Jesus came to bring us. It's the game changer. When you quit looking for, when you quit expecting all of life to bring you joy. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the chapter on love, we all know the love chapter. But somehow we read over verse 5 way too quick. Verse 5 says, thinks no evil, and it keeps no record of wrongs. I want you to underline that. Write that down. Keeps no record of wrongs. That word in the Greek, Logizomai, it's where we get our word log. To log. How many of you, we got some of us really old people grew up with a ledger book. You opened that big book and you made entries in a ledger. Anybody remember the ledger book? Now we do bookkeeping on computer, but we used to do it in a ledger book. That's the Greek word here. You make an entry, you log it. Now here's what's interesting about the definition of that. It says making an entry in a ledger with permanent ink. It's interesting. Permanent ink. See, Romans chapter 4 verse 8 says, blessed is the man whom the Lord does not impute. He doesn't write down. He's not keeping a ledger. He's not keeping a record of your sin. The Lord does not write down your wrong in permanent ink when you come to know Jesus. 2 Corinthians chapter 5:19. God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, not imputing their trespasses to them. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Keeps no record of wrong. You can write this down. You can write this down and put it on your refrigerator. In life, you will be wronged. Maybe we need to make a refrigerator magnet. You're going to be wronged. And you will be wronged on a regular basis. Your teacher is going to handle you wrongly. Your principal, your friends, your enemies, your co-workers, your bosses, your neighbors. Because people are not perfect, they do things that they should not have done, and you're wronged. You are wronged. Here's what we're going to talk about today is writing that wrong down in permanent ink. That's what we want to talk about. When you enroll in a new school and you tour, you interview, it's the greatest place in the world. Here's what you need to know. In a very short time, you're going to be devastated to find out your teacher's not perfect. The kids on the playground are not perfect. And you've got to know, I choose to go here and I'm going to navigate and work through all of the wrongs and the shortcomings and the difficulties in this. When you get married, you can know. You're walking down that aisle, that music's playing, you're dancing and you doing all that stuff that they do, going out the aisle and go outside and everybody throws, we used to throw rice, now we're throwing bird seeds on you or blowing bubbles on you or whatever. And everybody's screaming and clapping. And here's what you can know. In the morning the honeymoon doesn't hardly last until you can drive out of the parking lot before he's done made you mad. Here's what you can know. The next day his underwear and his socks aren't going to be where you wanted him to put his underwear. She's not going to keep the towels where you wanted the towels to be kept. And just quickly, the honeymoon is over and the bubbles and the rice and the bird seed, that's gone. And at that point, you choose to major on what's right and not write down in ink all that is wrong. Because you're going to be wronged. But I stood on stage and I said, for better or worse, here's what we're going to do. You just don't ever think worse is going to come. And I'm telling you, worse is going to come before you get out of the parking lot. Here's what I'm talking about today. Writing it in permanent ink. She won't do this and she won't do that and she won't do this. And I'm sick of the way he does. Come on, you're writing it down. You're writing it down. And I don't really know for the life of me, because I know the devil. I know sin nature. I know the carnal nature. I know imperfect people. For the life of me, I don't know why people expect not ever to be wronged. Now, this is just a side note. Let me just ask. I don't mean to expose you or anything, but have you ever done anything wrong? Just a thought. Have you ever acted have you ever said anything in a tone of voice? Have you ever handled a situation in a way that, now we're just among family here and I'm just asking, have you ever done anything wrong yourself? But why do we live like I'm perfect? I've never done anything wrong in my whole life, and I demand my wife, I demand my teacher, I demand the principal, I want this boss. Have you been the perfect worker? Have you been a blessing to be a co-worker with 100% of the time? Or have you ever just maybe said something? See, you got to live with the awareness, I'm not perfect. And if I'm going to keep this job, if I'm going to keep this wife, if I'm going to keep any friends at all, somebody's going to have to forgive me. Somebody is going to have to choose to overlook if I'm going to have any friends at all, somebody's going to have to overlook all of my quirks and wrongs and all of my hang-ups. Somebody has to overlook that. Okay, since that's the position I'm in, then why would I not expect to have to overlook that in my coworkers, my mate, my friends? That's where we live. That's where we live. I'll never get it. I'll never get it. Why parents expect and demand perfection from their kid's teacher when they don't have a clue how to handle their kid. They don't have it. They're as lost as Hogan's goat in handling their kid. They can't discipline this kid. They can't reel this kid in. But boy, they storm down here and they want a teacher that I'm doing better than you're doing. As a matter of fact, that I look at this. Come on. We all got to work together in this and understand we live in a fallen world. And I'm not going to fire, nor am I going to quit. We're going to overlook, we're going to work through, and we're going to mature through our difficulties. This has all been an introduction to today's sermon that I will now get to. That 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, keeps no record of wrongs. That accounting word, that's a bookkeeping word of writing down in permanent ink. It becomes a real life stealer. It becomes an abundant life stealer. Josh preached last week on the joy that God has for us. And you're talking about something that will steal the joy that Josh preached about last week. You're talking about something that will steal that joy. It's when you write down in permanent ink a wrong that has happened to you. We got a written list logged in our mind of how your wife wronged you, your husband is wronging you, your school didn't, and you wrote that down in your mind, and you call your friends and you read your wrong to them because it's written in your mind. And what's worse is you write it down. You type that wrong out and post it because I want everybody to know I've been wronged. I've been stolen from. I've been cheated. I've been lied to. This church used me. This church abused me. And I want everybody. And you wrote down your wrong in ink. Here's what I'm going to talk to you about today. That destroys you. That destroys you. The word that we use today is not that long Greek word. The word we use today is resentment. Resentment. Writing that wrong down in permanent ink, keeping a ledger of that wrong builds resentment in your heart. And when you keep a tally of that, when you write it in your mind, when you type it out and you post it on your page, what someone did to you, how someone wrongs you, what you hate about this or this, when you write that down, it becomes resentment in your heart. And here's what I want to talk about. Resentment will affect your marriage. Resentment will affect your relationship with your children. Resentment will affect a vacation that you're on. Resentment will affect a fun time that you're trying to have. Resentment will affect working relationships with coworkers during the day. I say some things to my wife who I love dearly. I should have never said that. I shouldn't have used that tone of voice. And I have to have her roll her eyes and go, oh, brother, he's a piece of work. So when she wrongs me, Why do I feel it necessary? She's like this. She's not going to do this, and she's not ever going to change. Why can't I roll my eyes and let it go? Because that's what I need her to do. See, I want her to roll her eyes and let it go. But I want to get in the car. I want to spew gravel all in the driveway. I want to flip them. I want to cuss somebody. I want to let my temper fly because I was wronged. Come on, church. We got to get a hold of this resentment thing. And everybody deals with it. Not one person in here doesn't have to deal with what we're talking about today. And I know that because we all live with, work with, are surrounded with imperfect people who wrong us. When someone wrongs you, you just can't act like you have been perfect. It's interesting, David, a great king, man after God's own heart, in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 1 through 6, he's on his deathbed. And he's talking to his son. And it's an interesting thing there when he goes back many, many years and he says, this guy wronged me, you get him. David passed on his resentment to his son. He had held a bitterness and a resentment and an unforgiveness in his heart for many, many years. And on his deathbed, he's passing that resentment on to his son. That is an item from a mental ledger written in ink. Today we're talking about Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. Don't let a root of bitterness spring up, grow up, listen to this, and defile you. And defile you. Medical doctors' studies all show that bitterness eats away physical health. Psychologist studies all show bitterness eats away mental health. When you keep a tally of the wrongs done to you, it'll eat you away physically and it'll eat you away mentally when you keep a record of the wrongs done to you. Resentment eats your life away. Resentment takes away the abundant joy that life is to bring you. We all face this, and we do on a regular basis. People not perfect, parents not perfect, best friends not perfect. I thought we were best friends. You are best friends. You just happen to be best friends with somebody who's not perfect. And your very best friends, your roommates, they just jumped up and did something wrong. That wasn't the way to handle that. Now, you can write that down and you can let it gnaw on you, or you can let that roll off of you and you can choose to be happy. Tim, I put my trust in them. I trusted them. You trusted somebody that was imperfect. Here's the point. When you write it down in ink, it destroys your life. When you let it go, it has no effect on you. And it was wrong. Church, I want you to know, I'm not making light of you being wronged. I'm not saying you weren't wronged. You were definitely wronged. What happened to you when you were 9 years old? What happened to you when you were 12? What happened to you when you were 16? What your ex-husband did to you? What your wife did to you? You were wronged. That affair, that lie, that cheat, what you've been through was horrible. It was horrible. I'm talking about you not writing it down and it destroying your life. One of our greatest examples is Joseph's life. And in Genesis chapter 37, if you hadn't read Joseph's life lately, go back and read chapter 37 to chapter 50 in Genesis. Chapter 37, Joseph was a young man, not full of a lot of wisdom, and had a dream. And so he told his dream that he probably should have kept to himself, to his brothers. They didn't find it so amusing. As a matter of fact, it made them so mad they just sold him to the slave traders. And they dipped his coat in some blood and told the dad, he got killed, he's dead. Whew. Probably a real cause to be resentful. I mean, just saying. You know about being resentful. Brothers sold you. Tim, you don't know what my brother did. Well, it didn't sell you to a slave trader. There is that. Because Joseph didn't write it down. Joseph did not write that down in ink. He's happy, full of joy, serving, giving, loving, and I mean quickly promoted to the head of Potiphar's household. In no time, Potiphar's wife makes an advance at Joseph. He runs out of the house. You've read this. You're talking about a mess in chapter 39. She screams, he tried to abuse me. What? You were the one chasing him. A total lie. He is thrown into the dungeon in chapter 39. You're talking about a good cause of resentment. When I get out of here, I'll get that woman. I'll get the last breath I take. And if I die before I kill her, I'm going to tell my son to go kill her. I mean, I'm going to... No resentment. Full of peace, full of joy, in dungeon. First thing you know, he's the head of the prison. Some co-prisoners had a dream. He interprets the dream and he says, listen here, when y'all get out, remember me. They got out, got Joseph. He's still down there. You're talking about resentment. I tell you, when I get out of here, I get my hands on them. Didn't write it down. Didn't write it down. Chapter 41, Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh hears that Joseph, a guy in prison, can interpret dreams. He sends for Joseph. All I can think about is when they came to me and me saying, you tell Pharaoh to take his dream and shove it where... I'm just thinking of my response. When Pharaoh come and want me to interpret his dream, I can tell you what Pharaoh can do with his dream, and you tell him this for me. You tell big boy, here's what I say about you and your dream. See, Joseph didn't write it down. He didn't write that wrong down. And so he goes right up, showers, shaves, cleans up, goes to Pharaoh, interprets the dream, and is appointed to the head of the whole food distribution in the middle of a famine. Wow. He refused to write wrongs down, and it never stole the life from him. Was Joseph wronged? 100% wronged. Brothers sold him into slavery. Yes, he was wronged. Was Joseph wronged? I mean, he was doing everything he could to leave Potiphar's wife, ran out of the house. The whole thing was a fabricated lie. He was wronged. He was wronged by the co-prisoners. At every turn, Joseph was wronged in life, yet he refused to write it down, and God continued to promote him his whole life. Very interesting. Chapter 50 of Genesis, Joseph's father dies, and in verse 14, they bury him. And the very next verse, verse 15, Joseph's brothers panic because, hey, our father is dead. Joseph's fixing to settle the score right here. And boy, they come in and start trying to jockey for position and start trying to iron this thing out. And Joseph verbalizes the key to life for us in verse 19. And he says, whoa, guys. I'm not in the place of God. What you meant to destroy me, God meant for good. And he says, I'm not in the place of God. Church, if we will let God handle our revenge, if we'll let God handle righting the wrongs, if we'll let God... Romans chapter 1 says God's wrath is constantly poured out on unrighteousness. People that have cheated you and wronged you, you can pray for them because God's wrath is loosed on them. I don't have to go settle the score. If I can ever get my hands around their neck, I can tell you what, I'm not in the place of God. God, you handle all of the wrongs that have been done to me. Today, I'm going to live happy. I'm going to live full of joy. And I refuse to let this wrong steal life from me. Church today, whoever you're holding that tally against, well, Tim, they deserve it. No doubt they do. No doubt they deserve it. No doubt they did you wrong. That's not the question that we're dealing with today. What you got to see is what they did wrong 20 years later is still destroying you. What they did wrong is still gnawing on you. What your ex-husband did to you years and years ago, what you went through years and years ago, it's still gnawing on you. Matthew 6:12, we got to live here. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. The bottom line is, you can't hold resentment and be forgiven yourself. From the youngest in here to the oldest in here, from something that was wronged and happened to you just this last week to some awful abuse that you suffered 30 or 40 years ago, you refuse to let resentment dig a foothold in your heart and allow it to steal life from you. Resentment will get you. You got to turn it over to the Lord. Y'all stand with me. I want everybody in here, we just take just a minute, just bow our heads and just do a little business with the Lord. There's not a person in this building, from the youngest to the oldest, who hadn't been wronged, who hadn't been done wrong, who hadn't been handled wrong, who hadn't been through a situation that was terrible. Every person in here has been cheated in some way. Come on, let's take that page out of our ledger. Let's get that page out of our ledger. Let's get it out. We all need forgiveness. Let's get it out. The church, I'm just aware that there's some that got some resentment to God. God, why did you let this happen? God, why did you do this to me? God, where were you when my mother's live-in boyfriend did? God, where were you when my dog got run over? God, where were you when this had to happen? And there are some folks in here that are blaming God. How many people out there have quit church, walked away from God because of the death of a loved one? Because of something that happened, because of a car wreck, because of cancer, because whatever. How many people have left church and are mad at God because of an abuse? Come on. Right now. Resentment, you're not getting me. Anger, you're not getting me. There's some in here that what happened to you years ago, it's got you. And it's had you. A business deal where you were wronged. I don't know what it was. You were lied. You were wrong. Come on. The problem is not what we went through. The problem is we wrote it down. Come on, Lord, I'm tearing some pages out of my book right now. Lord, I'm tearing some things out that was done to me. You just see it. You visualize it right now. What happened to you? In your teenage years, what's some boy, what's some girl, in some hurt, I'm tearing it out right now. I'm not going to live full of resentment. I'm not going to live with anger. Lord, I'm going to live in joy. Lord, I'm going to experience the joy that Josh preached on last Sunday. And I got to tear this resentment out. I tear it out. I forgive. I let it go. And Lord, I'm going to walk out of here set free. I'm going to walk out of here set free. Set free. And Lord, I will experience your life and your life more abundant. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this message from Christian Ministries Church. If this message impacted you and you'd like to sow into our ministry, you can give at cmchurch.com. If you'd like to listen to more of our messages, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for Christian Ministries. God bless.